Hey guys, we're live here in the Dirt Bike News Studio. I'm here with Russell Bruder from the OHVA, and we have some important things that we want to discuss with you today about the land closures that are happening here in Alberta. So, Russell, tell us a little about OHVA and what they're for.
Okay, well, I'm the chair for the Environmental Literature Review Committee. I came on board with the OHVA this spring. I'm a lifelong advocate for responsible recreation, and that's how I got involved in this whole process. The OHVA is an advocacy group for off-highway vehicle users in the province of Alberta. They're our lobby in government. They have the ability to talk to our ministers and get appointments and things that the average person can't do no matter how many times they ask. They've been working very hard over the last 8-10 months, developing plans, coming up with solutions, and desperately trying to get the government to listen to a viable option to what they're proposing for land closures in Alberta.
Okay, and today we're here kind of on a new medium to kind of talk to the users. Previous things aren't really working for us. There's been a lot of misinformation that's been going around in the news. We had a huge Castle rally that was quite impressive that a lot of people in Alberta came to, and they heard about what was happening in Castle, and they were kind of caught off guard. Why is that?
It was a little shocking even for residents of the Pinch Creek area. My kids are the 5th generation in my family to recreate in the Castle. So we've been there a long time. My family's been involved in the fight for responsible recreational management. My dad sat on a committee from the late 80s to the early 90s as part of the Castle Access Management Plan, which predates many of the plans that came after and have led up to where we are now. But when the Minister for Environment, Shannon Phillips, and Notley showed up in Pincher Creek, we had less than 24 hours notice as a community that they were coming to announce the establishment of a provincial park within the Castle Wildland Park, which had already been established under the previous government. There was a lot of opposition to basically being railroaded and misinformed on the whole process. I personally know a number of the stakeholders who sat at the stakeholder committee table. I've heard a lot of their grievances firsthand. I got involved in an organization that grew out of our frustration called CARMA, the Castle Area Recreational Management Alliance, before I got involved with the OHVA. We made fairly desperate attempts to get it known far and wide that recreationalists in Alberta were basically getting blindsided and having historical opportunities that we've been doing in this province, using the backcountry, teaching our kids to enjoy the backcountry, basically taken out from under us without any meaningful consultation at all, coming from the stakeholders that were representing some of the user groups in this province.
So that's kind of today. What happened, let's say 5 years ago? There was a plan that happened. There's a lot of meetings that went on. A lot of data was collected. I know personally a lot of clubs and groups have submitted their trail maps, everything they worked on. So all that information was out there, and then what happened with it?
So the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan came out of 5 years of public consultation with Albertans, and all Albertans, environmentalists, grazing associations, industry, oil, gas, logging, the ski hills that are present in different places in the province. They all sat in and actually had an opportunity to give input over that 5-year process. There were public meetings in 14 different rural communities, as well as the major centers in southern Alberta, to get input from all Albertans on what they wanted to see on public lands, how they wanted to manage cumulative effects, what they would be willing to sacrifice and what they wouldn't. Out of that came the South Saskatchewan Regional Management Plan, and it included off-highway vehicle use. It included quads, dirt bikes, side-by-sides, snowmobiles, hiking, hunting, camping, fishing, every recreational activity, photography, mountain climbing. All of those activities were included in some capacity in the original South Saskatchewan.
Which was 5-6+ years ago.
Yeah, and it came out under the previous government. When the NDP government came in, they began a new round of consultations, primarily with the environmental lobby, and we had a radical change in what was introduced specifically for the Castle. They redrafted the Castle plan for the Castle Wildland Park, and it talked.
This is our current government.
The current government. This was announced the 18th of January in Pincher Creek, with less than 24 hours notice to the community, like I said before. We didn't get to see the plan. The stakeholders were promised a look at it before it came out. That never happened. The stakeholders were livid when it did come out, and they did have a look at it because they had never given their consent on the plan. They had never agreed to what was in the plan.
Basically, they're blindsided by what said was going to happen, and all of a sudden they were just
the meetings were to give input and develop a plan and come to some agreement, which has been done historically. Like I said, my dad sat on a committee that did that in the 80s with a number of stakeholders, and they developed a plan trail by trail, canyon by canyon, area by area, so that there was an understanding of what would be permitted, what would not, areas that were sensitive that would be removed from certain types of access or at certain times. So that's what these stakeholders were expecting from this government. What they got was a very different outcome. They said, well, we sat and listened to you. But they didn't actually listen. They didn't take in what they said. They didn't listen to the evidence they brought forward or the science they brought forward. And this government came out with a plan at the first stakeholder meeting for the Castle area. The moderator said, I think we should be phasing out off-highway vehicles in 3 to 5 years. Oddly enough, when the draft was released, that is exactly what's in the draft. So nothing was taken from the stakeholders and input into the plan. They just ran ahead with what they had.
I'm sure all these groups were extremely frustrated, and I'm sure they ran to their representatives and they were saying, what's going on, guys?
Well, and not just frustrated because they weren't given an opportunity to actually have input before the plan came out, but because they were told they would have an opportunity to look at it and give it criticism before it came out. That never happened. The stakeholder group met separately from the ecological working group. Which was essentially 10 or 12 environmental lobbies, small ones, the Castle Crown Wilderness Coalition, up to CPAWS, the Sierra Club, the Yellowstone to Yukon Initiative. And they essentially handed the government what they wanted to see for this little corner of the world. We fought it tooth and nail. It's still not in legislation. It's still just a draft. There has been no solid changes in access. There have been some seasonal closures because of fire bans and things like that in the castle this year. But the most recent document that came out from the NDP government is basically 88 pages that heavily supports exactly what they said they were going to do in this draft.
And then for NDP government, basically our representative kind of for saying what happens off-road. So that would be Shannon Phillips, I believe, from what I've heard.
She's Environment and Parks. There's a separate minister for Tourism and Recreation.
Okay.
This kind of falls outside of it because everything they're talking about is wildland park, provincial park.
Gotcha.
Some of the public land use zones in Alberta that have traditionally been used. So they call the North Livingston, which is essentially everything north of the Crow's Nest Pass, west of Highway 22, all the way up to Kananaskis country, and then the Porcupine Hills, which is a very popular recreation area for Lethbridge and Calgary.
So what do we have in Castle before, say a year or 2 years ago, and what's happening right now in Castle?
So what we had under the previous government and the establishment of a wildland park was the ability to have greater enforcement powers to deal with the reckless disregard for nature that none of us can really tolerate. They brought in 11 new enforcement officers from K-Country South, and they were starting to at least have a presence and make a change in terms of being present, having some enforcement, doing some education, letting the people who are completely oblivious to how to look after the wilderness learn a little bit from the enforcement officers before they get fined and jailed and all the rest for it. Under the new draft, they're there to enforce all of the same regulations, but they now have a provincial park in the center of that. A provincial park doesn't work with off-highway vehicle use. A provincial park doesn't work with hunting and fishing. Yet they're saying we're going to still have some OHV use in the draft. We're going to phase it out. We're still going to have some hunting, but I guess we'll have a new permit system. This fall, after the second day of hunting season, they came out with their new firearms permit that you had to carry within the park. It wasn't even prepared beforehand.
So this it's not just OHV users. It's going to affect fishermen, hunters, all sorts. Like they use ATVs, and a lot of them are aging, and you know, basically they want to get around too.
Well, you look at somebody like my dad who's had 2 hip replacements. His ability to recreate and enjoy the wilderness that he used to hike in, ride a horse in, pick berries in, all the things he's been doing his whole life are fairly limited unless he's on a piece of off-highway vehicle equipment, whether it's a side-by-side or an ATV or a snowmobile. So I guess the Y2Y doesn't want anybody with limited mobility using the wilderness. They don't want anybody who makes too much noise using the wilderness. They're using some not Y2Y specifically, but the government and their draft and the way that they've written what they've got going there, they're using lineal footprint disturbance. They're using some numbers. They're citing a bunch of scientific studies, a bunch of peer-reviewed scientific studies talking about the density or footprint of trails in an area.
Right.
There's some magic numbers they throw out there. I spent 6 months this summer going over 1,400 pages that came out of the ecological working group. Right. They provided the science to the government as part of the draft. And every single body that put information into that, whether it was an NGO, a non-government organization, an environmental group, whether it was a government policy or plan, or whether it was a scientific journal,
Gotcha.
They all recognize the importance of looking at usage on a lineal disturbance.
Right now, who does the minister and consult to basically get information and input? What companies do they look at?
The Minister of Environment is Shannon Phillips. She's one of the Lethbridge area MLAs. This is kind of her baby, and Phillips is, or Notley's on board with it as well. Mm-hmm. So it has been impossible for the dealers in Lethbridge to get in contact with her. She won't answer her door at her constituency office. There have been people banned from her Facebook page for making comments that don't support what she's doing. There's been a lot of things happening that don't sound very democratic in terms of, I would like to have say.
Our free speech is being silenced kind of on the one medium that we all use.
It's one thing to have a conversation with somebody and they say, sorry, I don't agree with you, but it was nice to talk to you. Yeah. It's another thing for that person to say, nothing. I'm not going to have a conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to listen to what you have to say, which is what the stakeholder groups really felt happen in certain.
And a lot of times in our age, like we're right now here on Facebook, I'm sure it's all over the world. We've had people tune in and they're asking about it. Facebook is our medium now.
Yeah, social media, and one of the huge concerns we had when this was introduced is how do we get the twice-a-year camper, the guy who brings all his kids out once a year to the forestry, how do we get him informed about what's happening out there? And it's still shocking when somebody talks to you and goes, they're doing what? They have no idea what's happening, not only in our little corner down in Castle there, but the North Livingston, the Porcupines, and now all the way up to west of Edmonton here. So like I said, there's a lot more people suddenly aware of what's taking place because they're moving all the way up to public land use zones in Alberta.
And for basically all the information that's getting out, it's hard for us to kind of get our opinion out, the facts out for us. There's a lot of different ideas that are going around that we don't really agree with or are wrong, that aren't being corrected. Just me alone, like our Facebook and everything that pops up, even on, like, I listen to CBC radio all the time. I hear Y2Y and Love Your Headwaters always pop up on there. And to me, I think that's unfair that these groups are being represented and we're kind of being silenced, and we don't even get the chance to, have our say.
The Y2Y, or the Yellowstone to Yukon Initiative, is an organization that essentially would like to see everything from Yellowstone to Yukon preserved against logging, industry, oil and gas, mining, many types of motorized recreation. They seem to be quite happy to have, ski hills and national parks and things like that. But when it comes to something that doesn't meet with their own personal goals, they're advocating quite hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. The impacts have to be assessed in a realistic manner. If you're looking at science, is it applicable? Is it valid to the region you're working in? And is it socially relevant? So this Protect Your Headwaters program that everybody is hearing about, get educated. The Old Man Watershed that comes out of the South Saskatchewan, Lethbridge has got the best water quality award, I don't know how many years in a row, but apparently there's an issue with all of the feeder streams out of the Castle, which is a third of that watershed, causing problems. So the headwaters are in excellent shape if the waters coming out 100 miles downstream are the highest quality that can be seen in Alberta. The University of Alberta is doing a survey right now, and it shows very specifically that the headwaters in the South Saskatchewan are drinkable, swimmable, fishable, navigable. So they rate them as excellent and very high.
Even after just the devastating floods that went through a province that changed it, and completely unrecognizable from what it was 5-10 years ago.
And those are natural events that have an effect on the landscape. We can't mitigate or stop those things, but we can certainly make sure that we come in afterwards and our trails get engineered to go around where that stream has moved, that we pull the bridge back out of the water and put it in a new position. that's what management looks like, is mitigating the impacts after something like that happens, or making sure that there is no impact or as little impact as possible.
AOHVA has a website that they can get informed with a lot of information, a lot of documents on there, a lot of the planning that's going on. Everyone at home, if you're on your phones or on your computer, check out the AOHVA.com. They have lots of information on there. We're going to continue to say basically how can people get in there, how can they get their opinion once again if they're just tuning in.
Well, again, AOHVA is your representative, your lobby group in government, and then they've been working very hard to come up with solutions to the problems, not to eliminate user groups, but to deal with the concerns. Are they environmental concerns? Are they noise concerns? So they have an excellent 4-point plan, and it's on their website, and they are begging the government to pay attention to it and to come look at it and to see what we as users have to say. Yes, we accept this. This is a fantastic idea. We can all work within this. There's a Love Your Trails program that's out there. It's fairly new. If you want to have a say, if you want to get informed, go to the AOHVA, have a look at that 4-point plan. Decide whether those are things that you can agree with and that's what you want to see. Get behind it, sponsor it, send that to your MLA. Doesn't matter whether they're NDP or Wild Rose or Conservative. Talk to your member of government, whether it's municipal or provincial, and make sure that you have a say. Take your kids with you. Express your concerns to those people. Make sure that you let them know that this is going to have a huge impact on your quality of life, on your ability to enjoy the outdoors, on your ability to teach your kids an enjoyment of the outdoors, the history that you had with your grandfather camping at some place or your father camping at some place that a lot of us are trying to pass on to our children. Make sure that this gets said. It's more important that we as Albertans can continue to recreate in a way that we've all agreed upon, which we had under the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan prior to the NDP government. We had a 5-year consultation that came up with an excellent plan. Let's go back to that. Let's get away from the environmental lobby group plan that's being imposed in the Castle now, that's moving its way north to the Porcupines, that's moving its way north into the Livingston, and that's creeping its way up into Bighorn and these areas that are far and away from me, but a lot closer to a lot of people who are listening.
So last year was one of the driest years we had in Alberta.
Yeah.
We had a well-needed ban that came across BC. The entire province, anything south of the Saskatchewan River, was banned. You weren't allowed to be there with any ATVs, UTVs, dirt bikes. You weren't allowed to have a campfire, anything like that. I felt there was a massive slowdown in our province of just everyone couldn't do anything this summer. They were basically stuck at home. Camping is a huge part of our province and our culture. So how did that kind of transition back to your store?
So I think that it's important to remember that during that ban, we had the implication that these areas would open up again. So we saw a little bit of a snippet of what it would be like to lose these areas, but it was never in stone. It was never solid. We weren't losing them for good. So the window that we had was that it was over 4 weeks. It was just about 6 weeks, actually, if I recall. And that was sort of tough for everybody. I think we were down 40% over one of the months that we could calculate. So the business impact was quite large. And again, that was coming back to the fact that it would eventually be open again. So we can't even imagine how much we would drop if these areas were no longer available to us.
Okay. So a lot of people came to your store and they saw the ban was going on. How did they hear about it?
A lot of people actually didn't know until we told them ourselves, but some people did hear about it on the radio. Other people, kind of word of mouth sort of thing. And to our understanding, there were people going around the campsites letting people know that they needed to vacate with their off-highway vehicle.
Okay. And then, Russell, you said earlier on that all of Alberta, or southern Alberta basically, had a huge hit when the bans hit Castle, and those businesses down there, like tons of people are down there and they have all these small businesses. How were they affected when that ban came in?
A prime example is the Little Beaver Mine store. If you've ever been to the Castle, you come south of Pincher Creek or from the Crow's Nest Pass, you turn on the highway that leads into the ski hill, and the last community is Beaver Mines, and they got a 3-pump gas station and a convenience store and cold beer and everything else you need for camping. And they were in a bit of a concern about the traffic just dying off. You know? There were still a few hikers, there were still a few people that were non-motorized access, but when it was shut down completely, little organizations, little businesses like that definitely suffered. It's tough to know that means that guy's got less money to spend maybe at your business, whether it's clothing store or whatever else. There is a huge trickle down effect. The Karma group I was involved with did a survey early on in this whole process in the castle, and the number we came up with, if you just removed OHV and random camping from the castle, was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. It was absolutely astounding what the southwest corner of the province would suffer if that was a permanent thing.
And that's just one smaller area in southern Alberta.
And that was based on volunteer participation in the survey. People that said, hey, I come down this many days, this is what I spend. That didn't include the people that we didn't catch in that survey. It didn't include the mom and pop that are only out there once that didn't even know about this thing. So it wasn't all encompassing. So it was just a glimpse at what is potentially going to happen.
Okay, and we have a map here. It's actually from Yellowstone, Yukon. So everyone hears this name, and basically they have a huge voice here in Alberta, and they have a map here. Actually, we'll fade in here. So this map on the left-hand side will kind of explain to everybody here. We're going to zoom up and down. So the green is protected lands, and the yellow is conservation lands. So 1993 is going to be on your left side of your screen, and on the right side of the screen is going to be 2013. So basically, this shows kind of the progress of how much it is affecting. So now on your left side of the screen, this is 1993. As we scroll over, you'll see it's a significant change that's happened in 2013, and it's still growing. Absolutely. It's not slowing down. And a lot of this is happening without consultation of Albertans, recreational users, OHV. It's not being proper.
If you have an environmental or an ecological stakeholder group meeting separate from the stakeholders, the users, the taxpayers in this province, there is no opportunity for discourse. There is no opportunity to say what you're saying is absolutely false. The documents you're providing to prove what you're saying come from a study in the Netherlands. Some of the information the Ecological Working Group put forward in the castle has to do with Australia, with 4x4 Jeeps in the desert.
And I've read it, and the references are like from 1993, 1997.
It's valid science that was done by somebody somewhere. But is it applicable to our eastern slopes, to our recreation areas here? Or is it being rammed in? You know, protect your headwaters is a pretty nice slogan. Well, geez, the headwaters must be at risk if these people are talking about it. They're putting millions of dollars into ad campaigns or tens of thousands of dollars into ad campaigns to get the average Albertan worried their drinking water supply is at risk because of a dirt bike crossing a high elevation dry stream bed in August. And it's really hard to counteract that with anything. You fearmonger, you get that tactic in there that, oh my God, it's going to affect our water.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, a lot of people who aren't on the fence about it, they don't know anything one way or the other, are going, well, we should really get rid of whatever's causing it.
And with that, the AOHVA, they're trying to push this 4-point plan that's coming out. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how it's going to affect Alberta and what it exactly is meant for?
So it's their response to what the government is doing. They're saying, hey, listen, we can solve the concerns by addressing them specifically rather than closing areas. It's pretty easy to lock a gate and kick people out. So again, I'm not going to go into detail on it. I've read it. I wasn't part of formulating it, but I'm fully behind it in terms of what they're suggesting. Again, it's responsible recreation. It's making sure that there's a commitment to look after what we're using. And that's what responsible recreationists have been doing for decades, for generations.
Awesome. And on Facebook, if you guys look, we have a screen up. This is the AOHVA.com. This is the 4-point plan they have. And this framework, basically, that we are proposing, or AOHV are proposing, is going to help everyone enjoy our recreation and our mountains, you know, in a responsible way.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that as motorized recreationalists we've been doing since the 80s. They say, hey, listen, we think this is a sensitive sheep habitat, and we have valid reason for asking no motorbikes, no quads to be in there during these months. Motorized recreational groups are the first ones to acquiesce to that and say, okay, yeah, we can see why you want us to do that. We'll make sure we stay out for that particular time period, or maybe we close this trail. One of the things when they developed the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, there was a mandate in there that any change that was made had to be revisited after 5 years. And if they suggest, for example, closing trails to all off-highway vehicles, they revisit that in 5 years. If the reason for closing that was to improve elk habitat, and after 5 years the elk haven't come back, there's been no improvement, there was things in place that basically said, here's what we want to do. Here's we're going to check and make sure that it happened. And if it didn't happen, maybe we didn't need to do this in the first place. I don't think this government's going to follow through with that under the changes they've made to the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan. They had to amend the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan to bring in the new park, to change the boundaries on the wildland park. So they amended an existing document to suit the way they wanted to manage it.
And it wasn't for the groups that are actually using these areas per se.
It was a good plan that under 5 years of consultation, every Albertan had a voice, and those voices were measured and weighed, and the outcomes that came out of that were as good of consensus as you could get among all the different users.
We want to touch a little bit on some more topics that are going on, basic new stuff that's happening now in Alberta. Nordegg is basically kind of coming into a plan now to become a park, kind of what we were previously talking about what was happening with Castle.
I think there's a suggestion for a wildland park there as well, as what I've heard. If you kind of think of a stack of dominoes, with the Castle being the first one, the North Livingston, the Porcupines, they jumped north of North Kananaskis country up to the Calgary side, and the dominoes are falling pretty near to Jasper National Park now. So they've got nearly all the public land use zones in Alberta are looking like they're all going to fall under this same draft management plan they pounded into us for the Castle, that they leapfrogged to the North Livingston, they leapfrogged to the Porcupine Hills, and now, like I said, you guys that are way up here by Jasper National Park are all of a sudden going, what are they doing? What's going on? Which is where we were on January 18th, when the government walked in and said, hey, provincial park in the middle of this new giant wildland park, and a proposal to ban pretty much all the current activities for the benefit of something we feel is better.
And this is going to affect hunters, OHV users, recreational users, random campers. This has basically been proposed, and it's freely available for anyone to look at the new proposal that's coming through. So our map right now, it shows Lake Louise here on the bottom. If you can see our little cursor, this is Banff National Park. It's pushing its way up through the Bighorn, and it's going to come all the way up to Nordegg, which is just west of Rocky Mountain House. And then which is right bordering Jasper Park. So this area here, folks, is kind of the next aim of parks that that are asked to be implemented.
And it conveniently aligns with the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative. If you overlay the two maps, you'll see most of the areas that are under effect, or the next ones on the line, or the ones that we're hearing about, where people are really concerned and shocked. Now's the time to get involved. Now's the time to make sure you're talking to your municipal government, you're talking to your provincial government, talk to your federal government. Get the word out there that you're opposed to this, that you don't want lobby groups running what happens where taxpayers are paying for it in this province, that we want to continue to have the rights and freedoms we've all enjoyed for decades. You know, we want well-engineered, well-maintained trails. If you take a dirt bike trail, a quad trail, and hand it over to a pedal biker and a hiker, it's still a trail in the wilderness. And there are impacts from every human activity. Let's mitigate the impacts. Let's work together as Albertans. Let's share like all the other jurisdictions in North America do, not just the US states, the other provinces in Canada. You look at the recent announcement in Quebec, $12 million from the fees paid by OHV users given back to the OHV clubs to help maintain and improve trail access and mitigate environmental concerns.
Right, and so I've seen a lot of places they actually have, depending on what you're on, if you're on a sled trail, certain clubs kind of maintain these trails, and you have a sticker or a pass that you go on these trail systems. Is that something that should be pushed towards in Alberta? Is that kind of what we're going for?
If the government was willing to work with the OHV groups, the OHVers have always said, we're more than happy to pay our share, to make sure that we contribute, to add $10 to everybody's registration fee, whatever it takes. This government isn't willing to explore that option.
So yeah, if you guys are in the Bighorn, kind of understand that a lot of these things are going to affect you in every single way. The Bighorn Heritage ATV Society are working their butt off to kind of make sure that these areas are open to go enjoy. As you can see, massive bridges are being erected. We're not just going across these streams just because we want to have keep the land and everything pristine, and keep everyone happy and able to enjoy it. We don't need big mud puddles or anything like that.
And well engineered to mitigate the concerns. Again, don't just lock the gate and keep everybody out because you don't like the way things were done, or you think you know the way things are being done.
Right.
Work with the people of Alberta, work with the government of Alberta. The AOHVA has been begging this government to look at their 4-point plan, and it just isn't happening. They're not willing to do meaningful consultation with Alberta.
This is happening all over Alberta where people are, building trails like this, and it's in the shadows. People don't know about it.
And it's often private organizations, clubs, groups like the one that was sitting here before.
Yep.
Whether it's quad group, whether it's snowmobile group, or a multi-use group that's multi-season, it takes a lot of volunteer hours
and a lot of effort, as we can see. Like this bridge here is, no 1-hour task.
And very often the agreements they have with the government, after they raise all that money and build a bridge and put it in, that doesn't belong to the club. It doesn't belong to the people riding it. It belongs to the government.
Mm-hmm.
So they can literally pull 10s and 20 years of work away from organizations, tens of thousands of dollars put into a trail riding area, and hand it over to an equestrian group or other users and exclude the people who put all the time in to build it to make sure it's engineered and properly maintained.
And not only affects Albertans, but anyone coming here, it affects them as well later on. I know a lot of people here in our province, we go down to the States, we enjoy their trail systems, and they have amazing trail systems that we can use. You go and pay a fee and you go and use that. That's kind of what we want here in Alberta, right?
A well-maintained, well-engineered trail system that's open to everybody. Love your trails. It's not just about riding my dirt bike all day long or riding my snowmobile along. It's about teaching my kids an enjoyment of the wilderness. It's about, we have some of the most spectacular resources in the world in the front ranges of the Rocky Mountains. And we all deserve the right to be able to go out there and
these changes that might be coming or proposed,
the drafts that are in place
drafts
already,
that are coming, it's random campers are affected too.
Absolutely. I would say join a club, join 2 clubs. Tell your friends that camp, tell your friends that go berry picking using their quad, tell your friends that go taking pictures in the mountains using their dirt bike. It's not just a single group that's going to be affected by the closures that we're seeing under the draft in the castle, and that it's working its way all the way north to Nordegg, and the removal of public land use zones in favor of whether it's a wildland park or a provincial park or some restrictive version that kicks people out, that removes a large number of users for the benefit of very few for no ecologically valid reasons. You can't take a study from the Netherlands and say this is why we're closing the castle. It just doesn't work.
Which has been previously presented, and that's kind of the data they're going off of.
There's information that's been put forward that has no relevance whatsoever to the species that exist here, the terrain that we have here, and it's being presented as evidence for and justification for what they're doing.